the right to bear arms is important to a lot of Americans. Why do you think that is?
Well, the founders were very clear about it, and the assumption went without saying that everybody can have a gun to go out hunting because everybody was a hunter. But they wanted to be explicit that individuals owned guns because they never wanted to have the populace disarmed. Matter of fact, they encouraged and they believed that each community and each state would have a militia, which was just a group of people who could be called up in an emergency to be deputized for protection. But the gun really was, that Second Amendment was provided, ironically, and a lot of people don't understand this, but it was to protect against abuse of government, because they needed guns to protect against the abuse of the king.
They were always concerned about a tyrannical government because they had to overthrow the British. And quite frankly, they thought about, would the time ever come where American citizens would be rounded up and put into concentration camps? It would be good for them to have guns. Of course, we've had examples of that in World War II. We've rounded up citizens, Japanese citizens. And even today, we talk about the loss of habeas corpus and torture in secret prisons. So probably the Second Amendment is more important today than ever.
Right to bear arms must be supportive
Absolutely.
of. Any restrictions on that? Submachine guns?
Yeah.
Nuclear weapons?
Well, I think if there's a clear intent of blowing up a country and somebody knows about it, you know, that clear and present danger, you would be able to argue some restraint on that. But whether it's an automatic weapon or not is, I think, irrelevant. I think the gun laws today punish the minorities in the inner city because they can't defend themselves. The lack of respect for the Second Amendment is in the areas of our country that needs the Second Amendment the most. And this is, to me, so discriminatory, and that's in our inner cities. You go to the inner cities where there's the most crime, and yet if you're a law-abiding citizen, you're not allowed to defend against the crime.
Right.
So you're not allowed to have a gun in the inner city. So this, to me, is discriminatory. And, of course, there's a lot of laws against guns and drugs, and yet you have more violence in so many inner cities. So I think respect for the Second Amendment would go a long way to helping cut down on the violence and the killing of innocent people in many of our inner cities throughout the country.
Policemen can't protect us. Just think about the inner city where the most violence are. That's where the strictest gun control is. So the people who really need protection aren't allowed to have guns. But if you're rich and you live in rural or suburban areas, guns are much more prevalent, and the policemen don't stand out there and protect you. Everybody knows there's a gun in the house, and they are protected. Ultimate protection comes from the individual, and the founders knew this. They were very explicit.
And people live in the suburbs, they seem to have their guns and protect themselves.
1976, some of you will be aware of what happened in 76. That is when Washington, D.C., a city that Congress has jurisdiction over, introduced this horrible, horrible gun law, which has been a great cause of turmoil and violence and a lot of innocent people being killed because of this very strict gun law. Well, I introduced at that time a resolution of disapproval, which we could do properly under the Constitution. This was dismissed by a lot of the pro-gun people and others, and the argument back then was, well, if it's unconstitutional, the courts will sort it out. Just think now, how many years? That's 30-some years, and they're finally getting around to looking at it in the courts.
But the gun should be with the people. The Second Amendment is very, very clear. If we would have respected the Second Amendment properly on 9/11, I don't think 9/11 would have happened. The responsibility wouldn't have been on government. It would have been on the airlines.
My guess is that if the government hadn't taken over security on the airlines, maybe the airlines would have said that a pilot could have kept a pistol up front.
The airlines were told they can't have guns, and you couldn't resist. So why not stage a coup like they did and take over these airplanes?
The Second Amendment would have prevented 9/11. They might not even tried it if they knew every pilot had a gun, you know, and the responsibility should have been on the pilots and the airlines, not on the government telling us that you can't have a gun and you can't resist. So we set the stage. Oh, you're thinking about blowing up a few places.
So again, not just the pilots, but the airlines can let people, you know, you're welcome to bring a gun onto the plane.
The airlines have the total responsibility, just like you would here at Google. You would decide if gun ownership was permitted by the state, and you didn't want any guns on here. You have a right. You have a right to bring your own laws and say there's no guns on Google property. So that'd be fine with me.
I think we probably would do that.